So a little while ago, I posted this example injury report on LinkedIn, and it got a decent response, but also a few questions. So what in this video I'm going to try and do is just go over a couple of methods of collecting, collating, and visualizing data to allow you to better understand what's going on and then put things in place to try and counteract that. So the first thing to look at really is how you capture that data. Now, this is how I currently do it. Now, this is based off the 2006 consensus for collecting football data injuries and the 2020 IOC consensus on epidemiology around the methods of collection and categorization of injuries. So simple blocked out here. So obviously nothing on show, but well, the basic ones are the activity type, the sport being played, description of what happened. Then we start to go into the body part, the pathology slash tissue type, the mechanism, whether there was contact, what type of contact that was. And then we also have added in the stage they're currently at, the date of expected return to play, and the current days lost. The reason we do that is the main thing here is you'll see why S&C per week, we've got a relatively new program. So we want to see if there's a correlation between those training in the gym and whether they are or aren't picking up injuries and the impact that those injuries are having on their overall training, sports training. Gender, activity, sport is just so we can start to categorize that within our program. So we can see where those areas of high stress are and see how we can implement change there. The description is literally how that gets presented to us as coaches. So these injuries are all self-reported through Google Forms or communication with coaches or communications with the athletes themselves. So some of them might come from external sources. So if they've gone to a physio elsewhere, they might come back and say, this is what's happened and this is the injury. Some of it might just be someone coming up and going, oh, I twisted my ankle the other day. And then it might come from a coach or a parent as well, particularly with those youth athletes. Body part, nice and easy. That's just for the classification. Pathology is going to help us understand what's going on with those injuries. And then the mechanism can give us an idea, as you'll see in a minute, of how we can start to understand the nature of these injuries. For our stages, we actually have available, which means that child or student or athlete is completely fine. They've passed their return to play and they're available for training. We then also have available modified, which is where we might be reducing workload or slowly reducing how much sprint volume they're doing. Some nice examples, particularly within football, might just be looking at the amount of accelerations, decelerations they do and slowly building them back up to that top level, whatever we set as our baseline, whether that's from game data or normative data. You've got unavailable rehab, which means that they are currently working with us as a team, and unavailable, which means completely nothing. That's normally if they've just had their operation or something like that. If there's no training going on, it's very rare that they'll be completely unavailable. And available observation. Now, this is for those athletes that have past their return to play or they're on the very last stages and we just want to keep an eye on them. They're generally with repetitive injuries, so we just want the coaches to pay attention, keep an eye on them, see if they see anything out of the norm. Again, that's more of a subjective or qualitative characteristic we're looking at there, just to get a better idea, just to see if anything flares up. And then we do also have unknown. So there's an unknown and an unavailable there. One is completely unavailable literally the other day, just a dislocation. And so nothing is happening yet. And the other is we've had a report through a self-report through a form, but we're not actually sure on exactly the mechanisms or what's going on. So we're waiting to receive more information there. Days out, this column here is literally days lost to training. So when there is a loss to sports training, that is, so rehabilitation does not count as training in this scenario. So we are seeing how many days until they can return to their sport. So as I say, this is all self-reported or via the coach or parents or conversations with the athletes. So it's not perfect, but it's the best way we can get around the issue of addressing injuries at the moment. So a couple of ways you can then start to quantify that and look at that and start to use it. The first one is, this is actually a printout or a PDF of our Google Sheets. Our Google Forms link straight to it, so it all just gets recorded. And then we put them into pivot tables. And so we're just looking at the total in these examples. So this is now where you can see the breakdown by sport. So we can start to highlight those high risk sports. So for example, season 1, football is the highest total. We're looking at season 2, we still got football and basketball, but actually touch starts to come into play there, and then football again in season 3. Now, it's important that we look at a little deeper into this data. So football is one of our biggest sports, particularly in senior. And in that first season, that's a varsity season for football, but not basketball. So we'd expect to see a lot higher injury rates. Also, just coming back from summer, students don't get a chance to have a big preseason. So that's what we saw here. Is it was the first sport back post-COVID that went into a full season. So we saw a high number of injuries occur in within that season 1. Also, it depends on the relationship with the students or the athletes and the coaches as to whether all injuries are getting reported. You can see we've got golf down here. We have 1 reported injury. Now, I'm sure that's not the case. I'm not saying it has to be a major injury, but I'd be amazed if we've made it 3 seasons without without more than 1 injury. So that's where you can see the issues start to arise with comparing sport to sport. That's a little bit challenging to do because it does depend on how it gets reported. Injury by location, we can now start to better understand the nature of our cohort, of our different bodies, and what's going on. So we can see that over here, our knee and ankle are by far the highest number of injuries. Again, if we start to look at the sports that we play and where we've come back from, post-summer but post-COVID as well, there's a lot of fast reintroduction to running. So they won't necessarily have done much over summer, and they haven't done much throughout COVID. So then there's this huge spike in running volumes because everybody wants to get back and they all want to play their sports. Also, when we come back our season, the ground, the pitches are quite hard, as well as those indoor sports. So they've got a lot of impact on those going through their lower body to begin with. However, we can now start to understand and implement programs. So we've highlighted the ankle and the knee. So our warm-ups and our injury prevention, you're never going to prevent them all, but they can start to be built in to our warm-ups to highlight and attack those areas that we know are troublesome throughout our cohort. Activity by type, and then mechanism. So obviously we want to know, are these injuries happening in training? Are they fixtures, or are they recreational or PE or other? You can split that up however you want. We can actually see that we got a huge amount of injuries in fixtures as opposed to training, which, I mean, you're going to expect. However, it does mean that we've started to look at our training and how we go about it, and whether there are things that we aren't doing that mean our athletes are getting injured come game day. And then the final one, which I think is quite useful, is the mechanism. So as you can see here, our repetitive sudden onset increases significantly in season 2. And what we found when we looked into that was that there were a lot of double varsity athletes. So those have been playing 1 season and then going straight into a second season. So that's something that we're looking to address moving forward. And then those acute injuries as well, we can go back into that table and look at where and what those acute injuries are, and that actually is where the majority of our ankle injuries are happening. So again, it just allows us to better understand what's going on. We can also then look at this impact of strength and conditioning. So if I go on to the second report, we can start to understand of that no training, 1 up to 1 strength and conditioning, 2, 3, 3+. And the first thing that we immediately see is that there is a significantly higher number of days out from those from no days of S&C to at least 1 day of S&C. So we can assume, okay, it's not definitely cause and correlation, but we can assume that those who are partaking in S&C, the program is working. We are reducing the risk of injury. We aren't necessarily preventing all the injuries, but we are attacking those target areas. We can see, particularly in season 2 here, that decrease again of days out, even though the number of injuries was higher, the days out was significantly lower. Now, the odd one does come here in the 536 days for those who are doing 1 to 2 days of S&C. Now, that actually, we're very unlucky in season 1. We had 2 ACL injuries. So that significantly pushed up the numbers there. So one thing we are looking to address is we've used the average here, but it might be worth looking at using a median to sort of eliminate those outliers. We're not saying they don't count, but in order to get an understanding of the program as a whole, it might be better to look at median as opposed to average. So this again is all looking at the totals, just solid numbers. So we're looking within our own program. Another way you can do it is to look at injury rates. So this is generally assessed as injuries per 1,000 hours of training. And there is absolutely heaps of data out there. That is the problem though. There are so many different studies out there with different numbers. It's important that you find a cohort or participants that match your current cohort. So that's what we've done here and tried to do best in season 1, but we decided it wasn't actually our best way of doing it. The way you work it out, the number of exposures, number of students, the total exposures, and the total injuries gives you the injury rate per 1,000 hours of training. So you can begin to estimate the rates at which injuries are occurring within your program. Now you need to decide how you work that out. Is that PE lessons on top of sports training, on top of strength and conditioning, and estimate how many hours people are doing outside of school? You could assess that. You could send out a form to try and get an idea of how many hours per week students are doing in different bodies. So you can see where it starts to become quite challenging. But the benefit of that is you can start to see whether some of the trends within your program match those outside, because obviously if you're getting a much higher percentage of certain injuries in one sport that's against the norm, you can start to begin to look at your practices within as to why it's not similar to that sport as a whole. It might even be that your location, the style of play, anything like that, but it just starts to give you a little bit more information. So we can see here us compared to them, 48% or 42% versus 27%. So ankle and thigh, significantly higher injuries there. So that gives us a chance to go back and again address why that is happening. All of this is great for telling us what happened in the past, but it's how we now move forward. So as I said, one of the best things I personally think is this can start to guide our warm-ups and our gym work and our preventative work. So I personally put a lot of our preventative work into our warm-ups just to get everything prepped, particularly those areas that are at risk. But it just helps you understand what, why, and how is happening and how you can start to negate it. There's always going to be anomalies. There's always going to be outliers. But hopefully this gives you an idea of how you might want to look at injuries and how you can collect and collate the data in order to improve your program moving forward.